It's always a pleasure to be with you. And just looking at the camera, am I a little slanted today? I'm not sure. Maybe I am. That's okay. Hope you're well. It's been more of the same. You know, during this time, I'll bump into people in my apartment building, and people will say, "So, how are things? What's been going on?" And I have nothing new to say. It's always the same thing, day after day. Sometimes I forget what day it is. This morning, I had the lovely chance to have a meeting with Nikki and Dave here at CGC. We have our weekly meetings, and that always reminds me it's a Tuesday. But other than that, I sometimes forget what day it is. I wonder if you're having a bit of the same experience yourself. So let me know, please, that you can hear me and you can see me. Hi, Rick. First a comment. Let me just grab a guitar. So today, everyone's coming in. Yes, James Murphy said, Simon, you need a haircut. I think a great deal of us need a haircut these days. I better turn my Wi-Fi off. I think these streams are getting less and less formal each time, which is probably a good thing. I definitely get less stressed, that's for sure. I didn't ask Dave and Nikki this morning on our meeting. Dave, I see you're in the chat. Maybe you could tell me, but I'd be curious to know how you felt last Thursday on the live stream. How did it feel? Was it nerve-wracking? Was it different than other things? And Nikki, I'm not sure if Nikki's in here, but maybe it was. But yeah, maybe it was a different experience being live compared to. I remember Stephanie Jones, who we had on a couple of weeks back. She definitely, it was her first live stream she did, and she found it quite nerve-wracking too. So it's a little bit of a different beast. But just like anything, the lizard brain, the amygdala, gets used to it and stops perceiving the microphone and the camera and the live countdown as a threat, and so we don't experience the physiological. What would we say? Countermeasures almost of perceiving a threat. So Dave said it was a little bit nerve-wracking, but and he was exhausted as well. That is something that I have found. Evita, my wife, who many of you know, has been doing live streams. We've been collaborating on live streams twice a week as well with her dance colleagues, and we both just get absolutely exhausted after these. I'm not sure what it is exactly. I think it's a focus thing, and also having to speak for an hour straight. So it looks like everyone's coming in. Thank you very much for saying hello, Les. Great to have you. Just a wonderful story you conveyed, Les, in the forum about your coming togetherness of many different things in life, including the harmony context. That was a beautiful little story. So thank you for sharing that in the forum. Yes, I see other people need haircuts as well. I am definitely not the only one. I was commenting to Evita that in some regards, she will, maybe some of us will miss certain aspects about this period of time for Evita and I, because we get to spend time together, a lot of time together, whereas she would have been away for a solid month in April. So I'm really grateful to be with her. And Jenny says hello from a rainy UK. Well, Jenny, it is a glorious day in New York City today. It is probably the best, most beautiful day. It's about 17 degrees Celsius, beautifully sunny. There's still some cherry blossoms blooming down by the Hudson River. It's a glorious day here. So it's just, regardless of the situation, can't take away from the fact that sometimes we just get these beautiful days. So, all right. As you know, I gas bag for the first. Jenny said she doesn't need to know. She doesn't need to know that the weather's nice here. Well, we have to enjoy it when we get it, because it's been kind of gloomy. I think the rest of the week is kind of rainy up here too. So we'll take it. We'll take that one day. Okay. So today I am going to continue on the discussion we had last Tuesday, 1 week ago, about harmony. And I think a lot of you really enjoyed this process of talking about a couple of concepts and going into the scores and finding some discoveries. And what I want to do today is not so much introduce, I'm going to introduce a few more concepts, but I want to reinforce these ideas of non-chordal tones, and I want to dive into repertoire examples so that you can feel more confident in identifying triads and also identifying these non-chordal tones. I think if you get to the point where you say, oh, I'm over this, I know it, back to front, this is too easy, that's where you want to be. That's what you want it to be, so simple for you, so easy that you kind of can pull it off the page and look at something very quickly and identify a triad and maybe even identify its relationship to the notes around it. That's the goal. So we do want to stay with some of this information, because I think triad identification and then the non-chordal tones actually is, for me, in a practical sense, one of the most important things to get to grips with in this kind of analysis. So that's what we're going to do. The concepts I do want to bring in that will be a little new include some cadences. Now, I'm not sure if Kerry Conroy is in here, but Kerry asked in the question last week about cadences. And so we'll start identifying some of those. And as I explained last week, cadences and the relationships between harmonies are very much, some of them so common that we give them names. And it allows us to kind of develop a shorthand for identifying very repetitive things in certain points in the music. So if that sounds good, we're going to dive in. We'll probably start with a little bit of a revision of what we talked about last week. And then I might use the old, I think Dave, Nikki, and I decided to do some more workshops. We did the left-hand workshop, or they did the left-hand workshop last week, so we're going to do some more. And I think we're still going to use that famous Ode to Joy melody that is so glorious and well known to work on some things. And I will also use that melody today to demonstrate some cadences. Okay, so actually I'm going to start without the Photoshop open, and I want to just get your ears accustomed to some sounds. So last week we talked about identifying triads. From the scale, and we built it up from scale degrees and then building up in thirds and finding those chords. We then started to find those triads in the music itself and started to understand why there might be some notes that throw us curveballs in that process. Like there's a note that we want it to be a triad, but there's a wrong note in there. And what are those notes? Sometimes it's a seventh degree of it's a dominant 7 chord, and sometimes it's a non-chordal tone. So a passing note, a neighbor note, a suspension, or maybe a pedal tone. Now, those, and we did tap on a little bit of secondary dominance as well, and a couple of sort of things that were a little bit left field. Now I want to talk about a couple of those relationships between those chords and what we call them. The one that you are most familiar with is going to be called a perfect cadence. This is a really common sounding chord progression. It is 5-1, and in the key of C major, that 5-1 is going to be G major to C major. That is called a perfect cadence. It's the equivalent in a grammatical sense as a full stop or a period, as they say here in the US. 5-1. It's very final. It's adds a conclusion to an idea and usually rounds out a phrase or a statement. It has a really nice sense of closure. So if we were to explore the perfect cadence in Beethoven's setting of Schiller's Ode to Joy, So this is, C major is the 1 and G major is the 5. So see if you can follow along hearing the change between the two. It's not particularly difficult right now. Now the cadence in that progression, the perfect cadence, although I was going between 1 and 5 pretty much the entire time, the perfect cadence came at the end. And that's why it sounds so final. You could end the entire piece there and say that is the end. And also we will find it at the ends of phrases. And this is where these cadences become very useful into understanding the phrase structure in our pieces. So that's a perfect cadence, 5 to 1. It is possible to have a perfect cadence with the dominant 7th. Remember last week we found that the 5 chord in C major is G, B, D. But if we wanted to add intensity to that G major chord, the dominant chord in this key, we could add a 7th. So we've gone 1, skip 2, play 3, skip 2, play 5, skip back to the 1, and now we've got, no, sorry, skip 6, and now we're going to play a flat 7. That's this traditional barbershop, goodbye, 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 you know, that very cliched barbershop sound. That is a dominant 7 and adds more intensity so that we have more pull back to the 1. So yes, we could have a perfect cadence by using a dominant 7th as well. As opposed to this. Adding in the 7th just adds a little more zest. So, I see a couple of questions and I will address them moving forward. Maybe Dave, if you could keep a little corral of the questions. But because I don't want to lose our train of thought, perfect cadence 5 to 1. Now, what happens if we go 1 to 5? Before I start talking about it, I want you to listen to this sound and tell me what it feels like. What is, in terms of, let's talk about it in the context of a story or an idea, what does it feel like when we go 1 to 5? Now that's just a 1 to 5. If we're going to put that in the context of our melody, which we're framing everything in, the Ode to Joy, that's gone from 1 to 5, just there. How does that feel? You can use all sorts of descriptive words here. I want you to internalize it or come up with things. I think the process of being a bit creative here helps to learn it. So maybe put in the comments, how does that make you feel in the context of a story or an idea? I'll play it again. So we have Sultan. Hello, Sultan from Saudi Arabia. Great to see you. So he says, I feel it wants to relax. Absolutely. Ron Armstrong says unresolved. Ahmed says suspended. James is very descriptive. I love it. The edge of a cliff. Donna said it feels like the story is hanging on edge, waiting to be ended. Yes, and John Bullard says incomplete. All of these are spot on. This is very obviously all these descriptive words, as is happy and sad and colors and everything, are very subjective. Even if someone does have synesthesia, which is the mixing of senses, people hear a C major chord and they hear a C orange. Even that is subjective. People are going, with that skill or ability, don't have the same associations. It's not uniform. So it's very incomplete. It's a story hanging on the edge of a cliff, suspended, unresolved. Absolutely. Now, in a compositional sense, if you wanted to have a balanced phrase, where would a good place be to have an imperfect cadence, 1 to 5? Probably in the middle. You don't want it at the end here because that doesn't have a sense of resolution. So really we're left with somewhere in the middle to give what's sometimes described as a question to which there is an answer. Now, we discover that there's a perfect cadence at the end of this phrase. And now we're discovering that there's an imperfect cadence. This is what's called imperfect. In the middle. Right? So we get one half phrase here that poses a question, and then the other half phrase answers that question and feels rounded off. It's very balanced, right? So that is called an imperfect cadence. It's pretty easy to remember because a perfect cadence is 5 to 1, and an imperfect cadence is 1 to 5. Imperfect, perfect, right? So that's the second of our cadence we're identifying today. The third, which is common, but not as common as the 5 to 1 relationship, is 4 to 1. Now, in the key of C major, let's all do a little bit of arithmetic. C is 1, D is 2, E is 3. That means F is 4, and it's a major. Both the 4 and the 5 are always major. Now listen to this. That is a plagal, P-L-A-G-A-L cadence. Now, could you write this in the comments? The question to ask yourself is this cadence as strong, less strong, as intense, less intense as the perfect cadence? And why? Why do you think that that might be the case? We've got some amens. Can I get an amen? Yes. There's lots of amen in the comments coming through. You're absolutely right. This is the plagal cadence is also known as the amen cadence. So Ron says less closer. Ghislaine said it's more interesting. Oh, interesting, Brent. I haven't come across that. Lots of amens. Judy had an interesting take on that one. Okay, well, in terms of the functions, remember last time we have a couple of notes that have very strong tendencies. One of these strong tendencies is the 7th note, wanting to go back to 1. I'll tell you a little anecdote after this. That B really wants to go to the C, right? Less so, but still in that same idea. That D, the 2nd degree of the scale, wants to go to 1. People getting riled up in the comments here. So we've got the 7th degree wanting to go up to 1, the 2nd degree wanting perhaps to go down to 1 or up to 3, and then especially if we have the 4th degree in the dominant 7, it wants to go down to 3. So we have these really strong pulls. Now in the plagal cadence, what do we have? We have F, A, and C. Right? The C is common between both chords. You've got F, A, C, and then C, E, G. So the C is common. So the C stays. Have a listen to this. C, C. Yes, everyone's going, man, you're singing a choir part now. Now what else is going on? We've got an A. That's the 6th degree of C major. It's going to go down to G. it's not as strong. I think pretty clearly. And then finally we have the F, F-A-C, that's the root note of this chord. F, can't sing, you have to excuse my singing. F goes down to E, right? It's very beautiful. Ghislaine said it's more interesting, but it's not as strong. So that's a plagal cadence. And you can imagine that if you want to create variety in your music, you want a mix of strong and weak cadences. Stronger, weaker, what have you. Now, here's the last one I'm going to talk about, which we actually don't really have many examples of in the repertoire we're going to look at, but I think it's definitely got the coolest name. Now, here's the quiz for you. I'm going to play Ode to Joy, and I'm going to insert this cadence, and I want you to tell me what you would name it. What character does it have? This, as Ben would do. Ooh, what name do you give that? What has happened there? It's my favorite name of any cadence. People know. Yes, it is a deceptive cadence. Also, I believe, Linda, it is also known as interrupted, yes. So this is a great word. Just like in science, it's great when they come up with names that are evocative of what's actually happening. Here, we're obviously expecting it to go back to 1, a perfect cadence from 5 to 1. There's a degree of expectation. And of course, what's wonderful to do with expectation, whether it be with articulation that's repeated, whether it be with harmonies that's repeated, or phrases, is to interrupt that expectation and go somewhere else, because it creates variety, creates surprise. We often find that in music, and it offers a lovely ability to surprise and delight people. In terms of an interpretation way, let's say you play a repeat. We always use, right? And then the second time you might add ornaments. And what you've done is the whole first time there's no ornaments, and the second time there are. So it's kind of a surprise. You might change articulation, you might change ornaments. And so that adds some variety, which I think is always welcome. And so this is an opportunity for the composer to add variety by setting up an expectation, especially orally, and then interrupting it or going off quickly as a tangent. I will say as a caveat that all of this has to do with Western cultural music, and the reason I say that is because there is an argument, and there's I think like 12 Hours, which I did watch at one point, 12 Hours is the Norton Lectures by Leonard Bernstein, who argued a connection between tonal music and linguistics and natural sounds that occur with humans. But we've been culturally aligned with these sound worlds. We say, oh, this is where it goes, right? But that's because that's where all of the music has gone for much of our lives. If we've listened to Cantonese opera or Indian classical music, or, all sorts of other places from non-Western cultures, we would have a different sense of where that might go and what belongs where. So this is very much through the lens of Western music, and obviously Western classical music. So that's the 4 cadences we're going to be dealing with. We've got a perfect cadence. We have an imperfect cadence, the inverse. Plagal cadence, amen. and the interrupted cadence. Now, I really, as I said, I don't think we'll find too many examples in the pieces I've got for you of interrupted, but you will find it often in pop music. You'll find a lot of Beatles interrupted cadences, deceptive cadences. So that's a good place. It's very effective there. Okay, let's have a dive into the music. All right. So I have, well, actually, before we do this, do we have any questions? This would be a good time to answer questions about cadences specifically. So people are getting all right. It's like people are stuck at home or something. Everyone's getting all riled up in the comments here. There was a question. So I do remember there was a question about why is the seventh flat? Well, if we played a C major scale, we would go C, D, E, F, G, A, B natural. And that note, if you stack them all together, will give you a C7 chord. But, and this is a little bit of a tangent, there are 3 types of seventh chords. If we take C major, and then we add the 7th scale degree of that scale, which is B, we get a C major 7th. If we flatten that, and instead of playing a B natural, we play a B flat, we get what's called a dominant 7, or often just referred to as a 7 chord. Also known as a major minor 7. Why? Because we have the major triad and then the minor 7 or flattened 7. And the reason that is the most common one is it's again, the same reason, it's such a powerful draw back to the 1 chord. And then, of course, we also have a minor 7th chord. That would be with a minor triad. Let's take C minor, and then adding that B flat there. Three different sounds. And as you can start to hear, we can start adding variety in terms of the harmony that we use. We're dealing with major and minor triads for the most part, maybe some 7 chords. But what's a 9 chord? Well, you just keep stacking those notes. C, E is the 3rd, G is the 5th, B is the 7th. So if we just keep going up, we can add a D, that's 9, C9. We can add an F up there, might be C11. And of course, we're going to have to start taking notes out. But what I like to group these chords into, once we start getting into the world of sevenths and all these other numbers, I like to call them color chords, because we're taking functional harmony chords that work in our pieces and we're starting to add colors to them. They start to also lose a little bit of their identity, if you will, and they become less obvious. This is very obvious, right? But if we took right? I'm still doing a perfect cadence here, but I'm adding a C in here, adding a major 7th. This is going to be a suspension really, and then C major 7th with a D in there. So I'm adding color notes. So there's still that functionality, but it's less obvious. It's kind of shrouded. If you think about a nice maybe equivalent would be paintings by Turner of, the London Bridge and the fog. It's very amorphous. It's very hazy. It's not a bright sunny day in London with obvious, there's the bridge, there it is. It's got more nuance to it. It's shaded. And that's where we can go with harmony. There was another great question by Kerry. So Kerry asked, so that's it? Those 4 cadences, that's all there is? Absolutely not. These are very common cadences. Basically, like I explained last week, we're starting to describe relationships or functionality. How do they function in classical music? So we have phrases, and we usually end them off with, this is so common, 5-1-5-1, right? So we called it perfect cadence. And then often at the midway point of a phrase, we go 1-5. We'll call that an imperfect. They're named. Just like last week, I gave the analogy of naming people in your family, and they all have different roles. Some are more distant, some are more close. And so too goes these. We get names for progressions. I can't remember some of the names of them. Maybe someone in the comments knows them, but in jazz, you're going to have progressions that actually come from jazz charts. Like I'll play this progression. They get names because it's so popular. You've got 2-5-1s, you've got Neapolitan 6, you've got Italian 6, you've got German 6. You've got all of these things that are so named because they're useful and they're identifiable. And then if you come up with enough names for enough things, you can probably cover 99% of what you come across in music, and you can say, oh, that's that and that's that. But all it is codification, really. So these are 4 very, very common ones. And now we're going to dig in and identify some of them, along with non-chordal tones. Les, that's an interesting. We're kind of getting off. These are interesting questions, but they're getting off because I'm going to dive into the music. But Les asked, where is the divide between classical and jazz? Well, you're going to find many overlaps. Crossover has a little bit of a association in terms of it has a stigma with it a little bit, but you're going to find overlaps of musical worlds. Like, for instance, obviously, the great Roland Dienz incorporated a lot of gypsy jazz. Django Reinhardt influenced jazz. He did arrangements of jazz standards, and his own compositions incorporated those. Claude Debussy and Ravel were greatly influenced by the World Expo in Paris in the late 19th century. And so you've got influences from what they heard from jazz, and in Debussy as well. You've got flamenco music that started to come into his music. You've got Soirée dans Grenade, all these Spanish pieces that sounded incredibly Spanish, but he'd never been there, So there's definitely infusions between these two different worlds. You've got classical informing jazz. Jacques Lussier is a perfect example there. It's a very explicit example. So there is no line. There are lines in terms of tradition and pedagogy. Jazz has an improvisation core to it and collaborative core to it, which classical does not always have. But it did. Bach was known more as an improviser than anything else. Telemann actually was the famous composer in Germany at that time, and Bach was not actually that well known. It was only until Mendelssohn revived his B minor mass that Bach became famous and in vogue once more. Before that, he was more of a used in textbook examples. So hasn't always been like this, and it will definitely change in the future. Carrie was saying, oh man, I thought it was just those 4 and I had them down. But that's the beautiful thing. You can start discovering certain things. And often if you find a beautiful sound in a piece of music, there are names for it. Some funny comments today. All right, enough. Off to the Photoshop. Here we go. There it is. Alrighty. You'll have to excuse me if I'm slow with this stuff. There's all these windows that you don't see that are open with the chat and the microphone and screen things. Okay. Oh man, Matthew said, hard to think of Bach as akin to a 20th century jazz improviser. Must be the Whigs. They're so close. It really is. It's very much, in many ways, Bach was a jazz musician in terms of what we consider a jazz today. Okay, where shall we start? All right, let's start with The Minuet, formerly attributed to Bach. So this Minuet is actually by Christian Petzold and was often, for the longest time, attributed to Bach. That's because it was from Anna Magdalena Bach's notebook. And Barry Zimmerman, member at CGC, has, in an open mic, referred to it as Pretzel. And it shall ever be known as the Minuet by Pretzel. There we go, Dave. Yeah, Dave's already on it. Also known as Minuet by Pretzel. Okay, so here's what I would like you to do. I'm going to play the first section, the A section. I would like for you to see if you can identify either a perfect or an imperfect cadence as we're going along. Those are your two options. Can you hear a perfect or imperfect cadence? And now, keep in mind, when I'm talking about a cadence, it's not the relationship between every single chord change. It really, I'm asking for it at phrase endings or section endings. So that should help you instead of trying to think every single chord change. Rather, listen for half phrases and full phrases. Okay, so I'm going to stop at one of them, and could you tell me in the comments, as quick as you can, because there is a delay on the comments and it takes a while, what the cadence is, just before stopping. Do you feel satisfied? Is the story over, or is there a question hanging? Do you feel like you're about to go over a cliff? I'm trying to mix all the different suggestions before. What did we just hear at the end of that phrase? Does it feel complete? Does it not? And therefore, what cadence is it? Yes, we have imperfect. Donna says question. Brent says Roman numeral V for dominant. Imperfect, question, imperfect. Yes, spot on. So what we have, find a brush. I have to do all these funny things. What we have here, it's very intense. I need some color in my life. Here we go. Oops. Oh, look, there's that CGC blue. There we go. What's going on? Okay. There, that's where we stopped, right? Now let's zoom in and let's have a little go here. We are in the key of G major. G is the 1 chord, that's G, B, D. And then D major is the 5 chord, the dominant. So we've only got 2 chords, and this is not a trick question. D and F sharp. What is that? You can pause if you like. I'm going to tell you. That is a 5 chord. G and B. What is that? There's an A there, but A is suspect. We don't like A. That is that is the 1 chord, because the 1 chord is G, B, D. We're missing D, correct? And the B is in the bass, but that's because it's an inversion. This we'll come back to, the A. Now here, G, B, G. Still a 1 chord, methinks. In fact, I don't need to write that. It's just 1 all the way through here. And then here we have a D and an A, no F sharp, but we can pretty safely assume 5. So this is, and then of course, this note here, this note here is what? Please write it in the chat. We talked about it last week. It is a non-chordal tone, but what is it called? Yes, it is a passing tone, absolutely. So we've got D, so we've gone 5, 1 in first inversion, 1 in root position, 2, 5. I know I'm going, well, I hope I'm going at a good pace. I'm staying a little time with here. Now, so that is our imperfect cadence, the 1 to the 5, imperfect. Now, let's have a look at, well, I'm going to play now. Sorry for zooming in and out. I'm going to continue on from there to here, the double bar line here. That's the end of the first section. Have a listen and tell me what cadence it is. And I know it's safe to assume, but let's just play along anyway. Right? And I think I'm going to jump the gun here and assume that that's on the obvious side because we've only got 2 choices. Here, just look at the bass is often a very telltale sign. We're in the key of G major. D major is the 5 and G is the 1. So we've got the 1 here pretty clearly. Yes, we're missing the B, but it's the G is so prominent and the D is there too. We're going to call that a 1. Then here we have a D. Let me start with the B, that's odd. But there's the A and there's the F sharp. So we've got D, F sharp, A. So these notes here, this one, the second one, is definitely a passing tone. If we look at the note that comes here, that's an A to a B to an A. What was that one called? Looks like I'm graffitiing all over my music here. What was that? It's not a passing tone. It's very descriptive relationship. A to B, back down to A. So that B is a non-chordal tone. What is it? Neighbor, that's right. It's a neighbor note. Okay. Right, now I'm not going to go through the, so yes, we didn't do the classification, but yes, so that's a 5. Thank you, Hans. 5 to 1, and that is a perfect cadence. Let me go from the top so we can hear these. Now I want you just to listen to the sounds. It's about getting these into your ears. So from the top. Everyone's hanging on a cliff, waiting to see what happens, and we connect with a scale. Right. So very different particular sounds. Now what I'm going to do without actually going through that same process in this piece, I'm going to play the second half, and I want you to see if you can hear any similar moments. They might not be exactly the same, but let's, you can just yell at your computer and your dog, your spouse, your partner can be freaked out by you suddenly bursting out and saying, there it is! But you can just do that anyway. So I'm going to do the second half and then just yell out perfect or imperfect if you think you hear it. That is an interesting one. So this is a little more complex, and you would safely assume in many pieces that the B section, the second half of pieces, get a little more complex. Why? Because the first half is often stating musical ideas like themes and harmony, and then for variety and development, that's an important word to know. We'll definitely do some sessions on form, and the sonata form has a word of development which comes into play. But the development simply means we're developing ideas that came earlier. Okay, so Linda said, last one, definitely perfect. And Linda, you get 10 points for Gryffindor. Yes, 100%. And very similar here to what came before in that first phrase. If we've got the one chord here, G, see lots of G's and B's. No ambiguity here. No, they're all chord tones. 5 to 1. 1 5 1. So really nice and very clear, very strong cadence, wrapping up everything. Earlier though, for my ears, I did hear, again, we can safely assume symmetry in a lot of this music. In this area, something similar was there. It's sort of the end of an idea, but it doesn't feel completely closed. And what happened here, if you remembered last week, that's a sharp there. This is a secondary dominant. So we can, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but we can get a similar effect through using keys and modulating through keys, in that we can move away from home and move further away, and that then intensifies when we come back home the final time, right? There's a lot of good examples in Bach of that, where he only gives you the satisfaction of the home key in root position with a strong cadence at the very, very, very end of a piece. And the reason he holds off on that is because musically it builds up a lot of tension and then has a great sense of resolution at the end. And this is a small example. So I want to dig in. I always never get through anywhere near as much material as I want. Let's dive in to something else. Has anyone out there got a glass of wine or a beer? I mean, I feel like this would be good potential drinking footage, viewing material. Maybe relaxing with a Chianti or maybe a Albarino from Spain. Oh, I'm getting thirsty now. Okay, so this piece is wonderful for harmony. My brain clearly short-circuited just then. We definitely got some people having a nice little tipple out there. Martha's got some cake. Jenny's got a New Zealand white, maybe a Marlborough, a Sauvignon Blanc. Linda's got wine, and Carrie's got Chinese takeout. Delicious. Okay. This piece is, Fernando saw, more so than other composers of a similar time period, has a real regard for voice leading. And many of you at the Academy have heard me talk about voice leading, but what I mean is that in a very basic sense, the lines are very often stepwise, right? C, E, I can't sing, F, G, this middle line, C, 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 B. Like nothing jumps around. We talked a little bit about that last week when we talked about inversions, right? With the bass line, if you invert the chord, it allows you to have more interesting bass lines. So we'll talk about cadences, but I do want to get a little more heavily into the non-chordal tones, all right? So this is what is happening here. I'm gonna zoom in, and you can have a little think about it. So look, if we're starting to do analysis of a piece, right? What's our checklist? Right? You've got taking in information, yes, andantino, but not particularly applicable to harmony. 3/4, it's time signature, good for playing, not for harmony. Key signature, noticeably absent. Well, I guess it's not absent. There are just no accidentals there. So it's likely to be C major or A minor. That's two keys with no sharps or flats. And when our first note is a C, so a pretty good bet that it's going to be C major. So C, C, E, E, C, E. These should sound pretty familiar to you. And then there's C here, and then there's an F going on here. And then what on earth is here? G, C, D. Like, you can even see it visually. It looks tense, right? There's the notes are fighting for space over here. So, okay, we're in C major. That's a 1 chord here. To change my brush somehow. This here is still a 1 chord, but the bass has it's a first inversion. So we'd say so it's terrible. Hang on. I need the fuzziness to go away, Photoshop. Here we go. Oh gosh. Sorry, it's taking a while. No, it's not going to work at all. How about, yes. Technical difficulties. All right. Okay. What? I got no idea what's going on. Apologies. Technical difficulty. I'm just going to go back to that. Okay, that's a 1/6, which means a 1 chord in first inversion. This is probably still a 1 chord. We're going to consider this a passing tone, right? E, F, G, passing tone. Now here, what's happening with this right here? I'm going to ask you in the chat. Some people might already know. I've talked about this in plenty of coaching calls and the seminars. Think about what we've been talking about, because I don't throw trick questions in here. We've talked about the perfect cadence and the imperfect cadence. Look, we started with the 1 chord. We're saying this is still a 1 chord with a passing tone. That's explaining the F. What's explaining the C and the B? Mr. Barber, I believe, has the answer. Anyone else? So suspension it is. The E from the C major chord. Hang on, no, excuse me. The C from the C major chord is suspended across, like a suspension bridge, to the G major chord, the dominant harmony, and then it goes down to the B where it wants to be, where it belongs. And it's the most beautiful sounding thing. That C acquiesces, it capitulates, and goes down to the B, and with a nice, oh no, what did I do? With a nice soft resolution in the right hand. It's very expressive. Okay, so we've used our non-chordal tones to identify, in fact, what's going on in terms of the harmony, and all it is 1, 5, right? 1 to 5. There's your imperfect cadence. So there's a nice example there of, initially that movement there would be, I think, confusing if we didn't factor in the non-chordal tones. Can we safely assume that, I mean, this even visually looks similar? Yes, you can absolutely assume that's a similar kind of treatment, and it definitely is. That D is suspended across to the next chord and resolved. Now, we don't always have to analyze it and understand exactly what it is, but we can hear that it's the same material. Okay, I do want to do some other pieces, but because we don't often get to hear it so much in our 1/5 world of Giuliani and co. What is this? This is different. This is something we have talked about in this hour, but we haven't talked about recently. The last two measures. Ready? From beats. So it's going to go. Where should I start? I'm going to start at the beginning of the second last bar. Judy, what does that make you want to say? I'm going to back up even to the beginning of the last line. Amen. Absolutely. So it looks very complicated here, but I think, first of all, trust your ears. There's certain sounds of certain cadences that become quite familiar, and Judy is spot on. Amen is going on here. And so that's the plagal cadence we talked about. F to C, 4 to 1. But it is complicated by quite a lot of these lines here, are even making the suspensions more obvious because there's a visual tie, visual suspension. And now that we're thinking about harmony and suspensions and non-chordal tones, we get a better sense of why. Why would we go to all the effort, which is really not easy on the guitar, of keeping these notes down in the left hand? Is it just Simon being a pill and saying, no, keep your left hand down? No, the reason is, I'm sure some people are laughing there, hopefully not too hard. The reason is that we are getting the most expression out of this harmonic movement because, yes, it's a plagal cadence. F. Oh, actually, my gosh. No, here's the F. It's doing an interesting thing. I am analyzing on the fly here. And this is not an F back here. Huh. But here, right? Okay, so if we don't hold on to that F, then we don't get this beautiful resolution here of the suspension. Now, what I just realized, so let me, well, before I get there, I'm going to play this and I'm going to be lazy with my left hand fingers. I'm going to lift fingers. Now, that is still nice, but it is definitely not as nice because I didn't hold on to that F. That F, I lifted the finger. I'm not making an effort to keep that F. If I do, let's hear it now. I'm going to put the F back in. Oh, sorry. Ooh, gives me chills. And you hear it. If you treat the E, D, E very softly, it connects in your ears. If you don't, let me play it too loudly. Sounds like something else. Yep. Oh, I hit another string. But it's such a beautiful ending. Okay, so what I realized as I was looking through this is here, right? This isn't really interesting. I'd never seen this before at the ending because you can hear, your ears are telling you it's a plagal cadence, no question. But let's have a look at these notes. G, D, F natural, B, B. This is a passing tone. This is a neighbor note, right? So we're going to take those out. G, D, B, F, B. That is a G7. That is a dominant 7 chord, right? It's Giuliani's favorite chord, G7. That's what's happening at the end. 5, 1. But what's so special about this is that Saw, in his true genius, he's taken this F and he's extended it over here. So if you keep the resonance going, this C is not a C just yet. It becomes an F chord. F, C, C, right? And we get the effect of a plagal cadence with a suspension. It's really interesting. I'd never thought of it this way before. So we've got 5, very weak but beautiful 4 that collapses into a C. I mean, you could also argue that this is just a 5-7 with a suspension that goes in, but it's that suspension that gives us that plagal cadence. That's really interesting. I mean, so I think it'd be totally acceptable to say 5-7, and then this is what's called a 4-3 suspension over 1. That would be fine. So that's perfect cadence. That's the 4. The reason we call it 4-3 is C is 1, D is 2, E is 3, F is 4 scale degrees above, and it goes down to 3, 4 to 3. But this, to me, sounds like a plagal cadence. And that's where you can get into arguments with people saying, clearly it's just a perfect cadence with a suspension. No, I hear it as, this would be, sorry for, I need to up my Photoshop skills. A 4 chord to like a little plagal cadence. And the reason you can argue about this is you can interpret it different ways. But, you know, there was a question, well, it wasn't really a question last week, it was more of a statement. Someone said, got the harmony, need the practical application of it, right? This is a practical application. If you do not realize that that F is so intrinsic to this progression and that you need to treat it like a descending, resolving suspension, then you may choose fingering or just play this without understanding that, and just you'll lose this glorious effect at the end there. All right, that was an interesting one because I kind of reneged on the, what am I doing? Here we go. Now, one more. I know we're running over time. I always run over on these ones. I think they need kind of a slow explanation. Let's do one more. Okay. Okay, I see with my little eye lots of non-chordal tones. This is Domenico Scarlatti. What's going on with this thing? Oh, good God. Okay, Domenico Scarlatti, Sonata K 322. It sounds like this. Okay, so I want to do the same thing as the Minuet. I'm going to play through a bit of it. I want to see if you can hear perfect or imperfect cadences, or maybe, for that matter, it could be plagal. I actually haven't gone through and sort of done all this analysis pre-prepared. I am doing it on the fly with you. Okay, so it's in A major, 3 sharps. A, C, E, A, E, all A major. Great. Now what I'm interested in, I said icy passing tones. That's a M. Night Shyamalan reference for anyone. We can be pretty safe in many cases that it's going to go from 1 to 5, and oops, indeed it does. So 5 in the key of A major is E major. There's your E. There's a B. There's an E. There's a G sharp. There's a D natural. That is looking like we've got a 7 chord. There's another D natural. Okay, so instead of marking all the chord tones, let's just mark what is not a chord tone: F sharp and C sharp. And what's interesting about the C sharp to me, goodbye Dave, have a great dinner, thank you for staying around. What's interesting about the C sharp here is that it's on a strong beat. This is something we start to come into, strong beats and weak beats, and the importance of the notes that we find there. Often on strong beats, either maybe 1 or 3 in the case of 4/4, we probably want some chord tones. But here we have a non-chordal tone on a strong beat, on the 3. Right? So we get that kind of yadam, yadam, creates a musical effect. And not so much with Scarlatti, but definitely with Beethoven and Haydn, you're going to start finding these little, or Bach as well, little ideas that come up in very early parts of the piece, start to get expanded on later. So here, for example, we kind of get the same idea of this is the non-chordal tone on a strong beat. Oops. Do you hear that? Yadam, yadam, yadam. And then in the bass, we've got this. What it actually wants is this. So it's an E chord, but he's kept the A from before and put a dissonant note or non-chordal tone on a strong beat. If it were an E, like it should be, nowhere near as interesting. But this idea starts here, non-chordal tone on a strong beat. All right, I'm going to try and find one more thing. Well, let's see if we can find an imperfect cadence. I know people probably, I'm rather long, these things always get out of hand. So let's see if we can find a cadence. That sounds, even just there, it sounds to me like the culmination of a small idea. It's like, that's an idea and we've finished. And let's have a look. It sounded to me like that. So let's see what happened. We are in A major. We've gone, look at the bass, E to A. E is the 5. So we're probably going to have 5 to 1. What is that called? That is called a perfect cadence, 5 to 1. What's the A doing there? It's doing that same thing as the C sharp. We've got a non-chordal tone on a strong beat. We get that leaning sound, and it's part of this scale. E, D, C sharp, B, A, G sharp. So we could call it a passing tone really, but it's kind of a almost acting like a suspension. So another 5, 1. All right. Okay, I'm back. I don't want to drag on too long because, as you can see, you could just spend a long time going through all of this and analyzing. Hopefully, I hope that was interesting. It is possible to 1 week have some revelations and discoveries and things become clear, and then you delve in a bit more and you start going, oh, you kind of get into the thicket. You know, you find nuances in each piece that are harder to put your finger on, and special, you know, kind of like in language where you have rules, you find exceptions to all of those rules. But this whole process is what we do when we analyze music. Like I said last week, analysis is anything you can do within your skill set to understand a piece of music in a different way, to get to know a piece of music on different levels, whether it be hearing it on the piano and the guitar, or whether it be just identifying form or looking at the key signature or phrases, all of that all counts. So we are digging in to the world of harmony. And as you can see, I think more so than just the triads, as we start to delve into cadences and then progressions, we can use that to understand the phrasing of pieces. So it really is a tool in that respect and other respects as a way of understanding pieces, but also that impacts how you play something. We just saw with the Fernando Saw study that we now understand on a harmonic level, why that F needs to be held with the fourth finger. It's not just an instruction in the music or something that your teacher's trying to force upon you. It's a musical effect that's needed to be done correctly for the harmony to work the way it was intended. Okay. Question. Martha asked, do you think composers used this analysis as they were composing? I don't know for sure, but I would very much liken it to how we might write an essay. That is, we have learned grammar, we have learned how to present a thesis and then add arguments, we have learned paragraphs, we have learned how to write a conclusion. And so this is kind of like musical syntax for a period of time. As you progress into the 20th century or even late 19th century and beyond, you start to get more idiosyncratic styles of writing. Composers sought out individuality and they experimented. And so you started to get the inverse happening where people looked at what composers were doing and then tried to create rules around that to understand how that was happening. Now, you will find composers that have very discernible constructs like Arnold Schoenberg and serial tone rows and matrices. These people who started to go into mathematical worlds, absolute serialism, that's Boulez, and you get all of these. Like there were composers in the 20th century who not only had a predetermined series of notes that they would use, always in that same order, but then they would get into having dynamics and articulation, all these aspects that were pre-planned, and then they would create a piece of music. So you can't approach that music with this kind of analysis. It won't work. This is for sort of, I can't think of what the term is, common. It's basically Baroque, classical, romantic music can be analyzed with these approaches. Les asked, is there a good book on all of this? When I was a student at university, we got these big tomes for harmony books that were workbooks for several years. I don't know a good book off the top of my head. The books themselves can be a little thick to get through and somewhat disheartening sometimes, because a lot of it, what I experienced was going through the process of doing something called 4-part harmony, and you learned about basically how to write these cadences but in a certain way. And I find that it can get quite abstract and divorced from what we do on the guitar. I try to explain what we do by melding the two together at the same time from the beginning. And Stephen suggests I should write one. No way. I get very excited about playing pieces and practicing and things, so I'm happy to put time in and write that. But harmony, I enjoy going through this like we're doing and kind of exploring and discovering things. But I think to do this well it's a huge undertaking. It's why those books get so thick, because there's so many exceptions and caveats and rules and examples. So, but thank you for the idea. Maybe one day. Someone on Facebook asked, was the 7 chord used much in Baroque music? Absolutely. Often the diminished 7th chord, yeah, uh, like a diminished, yeah, seventh chord would be used in a function similar to the dominant because it shares a lot of the same notes. You've got the seventh note, you've got the second note, and that you very commonly use the diminished chord going to resolution, tension resolution. There we go. There's a recommendation in there from Ron. Basic harmonic progressions, Clow and Conley. Yeah, I think there are some good books there, but Brent wants. We're going to go. We've gone from Saw studies to Wagner next. No. All right. Well, this has been a bit of a longer session. Thank you for staying with me. We'll do something on Thursday. I'm not 100% sure what it will be just yet, but we'll do something. So please join me again on Thursday. I hope you're all well. I hope you're all safe. Thank you for your company, and I'll see you soon. Bye.